a lot of people that I see on Twitter on the right are saying basically that both of these stories are game changers for them. And I'm seeing a number of people on the right, big accounts with big followings, using the word radicalized. I've been seeing for the last 2 or 3 days this word from coming from different people on the right, on Twitter, different accounts that I watch or follow or whatever, using this term. And they say I'm radicalized now. I'm radicalized. And first of all, I don't think I would, well, everybody can express themselves, but a free country, but I think that that's an unfortunate word, and I wish that they would stop using it. I understand the sentiment they're trying to get across there. Like they're saying like I'm fucking fed up. I'm fed up. I'm fed up. I'm fed up. Like the Network movie, right? I'm mad as hell and I just can't take it anymore. I get it, but you don't want to use the word radicalized because it has such a negative connotation. Okay, you're radicalized. What does that mean? You're going to go out and blow up a building now, or what? What does that mean? So it's not a helpful term, but whatever. But it's not a helpful term. So I guess I'm going to start off this thing actually by criticizing a bit, just a bit. Before I start pissing you leftists off, I'll criticize just a bit here at the outset people on the right who are using language. I'm not everybody, but I'm seeing too much incendiary language. And I understand you're pissed. I understand that you've seen videos now of two nice people. I know that some of you leftists, Charlie Kirk, you're like, how could she say that? We'll talk about that in a minute. But two nice people who going about their business, pursuing their dreams, goals, beliefs, whatever, who have been brutally killed in front of us. So, I mean, I totally get the sentiment. But radicalized is not the term you want to use because that's gonna start making people think that you're about to go do something crazy, right? And that's just not it's not helpful. But anyway, I'm seeing that a lot. Radicalized. So one of the things that I want to talk about in the next 45 minutes or whatever is what do I think that means? What exactly are they saying? And like where would we go from here? If people are feeling radicalized, then what kind of action are they wanting to take? And I want to talk about that and get into that. But let's start, everybody, with something that I posted on Instagram and on Twitter that's actually getting a lot of traction. It surprised me. It's getting a lot of traction. So I was quoting here and I was paraphrasing someone that I'd been interacting with. So this is not exactly what they said, but I think it's a good paraphrase. And a number of people I've seen saying who are more on the left, I've seen saying a version of this. Quote, Charlie Kirk was a bigot because he criticized Islam, was anti-abortion, anti-trans, and didn't believe in same-sex marriage. And then this is what I wrote. Y'all, these are all highly contested, complicated cultural issues that people have been hashing out in various ways for thousands of years. Just because modern progressive society thinks the book should be closed on this stuff doesn't mean you get to call time on these debates and declare someone a bigot for expressing differences. And then I talked about some ways in which I am against what Charlie Kirk stood for. I'm pro-abortion, pro-gay marriage, and yet I also think Charlie Kirk was a nice guy. So I think that there is this idea that some people have that history is one of total linear progress. In other words, the backward ideas were in the past, and you've got all of these really backward, really bigoted, terrible ideas, terrible practices in the past. And as you move, as society, as culture moves into the future, then you just get more and more progressively, more and more correct. Right. And so, for instance, we can look back at things that are clear abominations like slavery, for example, and we can say, or certain ways in which women were treated, women not allowed to own property in a lot of cases, et cetera, et cetera. We can look back at those things and we can say, oh, that was so barbaric, or that was so closed-minded or restrictive or whatever. And thank God we've made all this progress. And of course, I would agree in both of those areas, we have made progress, right? It's been a good progression. But that is not the case with everything. And it's much more correct, I think, to say that history, rather than being linear progression of becoming more and more moral, more and more just, more and more correct as we go, it's actually, there's a lot of like back and forth. There's a lot of like a sort of thrashing about as I use the word hashing, people and cultures are constantly hashing out these issues in various ways and through various permutations. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that I think a lot of people have this attitude that we have when it comes to things like same sex marriage or abortion rights or our acceptance of trans ideology, or what was the other one? Or we talk about things like concerns over Islamic fundamentalism. I think that a number of people think that we have closed the book on any questions or any issues with these things. And if you have opinions, if you have opinions that go against these things, or you critique these things, or maybe even you satirize or make fun of these things, then you are automatically a bigot. Just as we would think about someone who thought it was okay 100 years ago to lynch a black man for whistling at a white woman or something, right, like that, right? And so that's the first thing that I want to say, is that I have seen a number of people talking about Charlie Kirk, and not saying that he deserved to die. I mean, I guess there's some assholes and Looney Tunes who are saying that, but in general, intelligent people that I respect on the left, I'm seeing some of them say some version of, well, look at all of the asshole stuff that he said, and look at all of the abominable positions that he held and that he promoted. He was a bigot. And so, why are we mourning this shitty guy? Right. And so, what I would say to you again is that the more history that you learn, I'm not trying to condescend to people. Of course, you can be a hardcore leftist and know a ton of history, right? So I'm not saying that you don't know history, but one of the things personally studying history that I find interesting is how you can see how all of these issues, for the most part, that we argue about today, these political and sociological issues, these are things that people for thousands of years have been hashing out in various ways. Now, like, for example, same sex marriage. No, you have never had in any other previous culture a legal recognition of same sex marriage like we have now. That's clearly a new thing. But the issue of there have always been gay people, there have always been people with same sex attraction. And in various ways, cultures have been hashing this thing out. And it is not right to say that everything about the way the past dealt with this was bigoted. You could just study history and you can see that there were times when cultures and societies were much more relaxed on this, or even promoted it in various ways, or in various pockets or sectors of society, or whatever, right? I don't have time for this lesson, but you know what I'm saying. And so someone like Charlie Kirk, we cannot call people bigots because they have not come on board with a leftist perspective of things. We just can't, because there are still too many thorny issues embedded in all this stuff. I'll give you an example. The trans issue. I get a lot of shit actually from some of my followers some of them who are trans, who say it pisses me off so much, or makes me so angry or sad the way that you have these bigoted views. Well, let me tell you something. I have never in my life believed that we need to shame someone for wanting to cross dress or wanting to behave in a way that is not cisgender. I have always believed that people should have the freedom to do whatever they want, including actually transitioning biologically. Just like I think people have the right to get plastic surgery, even if some people take it too far and they do terrible things, they butcher their bodies. I feel the same thing about trans people. But as a number of you know, what we have seen is that it's not that simple, because there are demands also that some in the trans community have been making that I cannot get on board with, such as the idea that children should be able to transition, or that we should be encouraging children when they have gender dysphoria and adolescents to transition. I also have a problem with the idea that these biological transformations are even honestly possible without butchering your body or doing a lot of damage to your body. This is what I mean. And this is something that people don't talk about unless you investigate this or you happen to see some people talk about the transitioning process online. But did y'all know that when people have these surgeries to transition, to change their gender, that there are so many common terrible side effects of these surgeries that are just, I mean, a number of them are just grotesque. And you can go online and you can see all of these horror stories about people now who basically have non-functional bodies, or they have grotesque, painful conditions in their bodies because of things that happened to them when they were transitioning, when they were getting surgery, when they're getting hormones and all of that. And you might say, well, look, you can go online and you can see all kinds of horror stories, but there have been studies that have been done. And if you look at a study, for example, of side effects on genital surgery, where they basically, try to turn a man's genitals into a woman's, right, or vice versa. And what you see is that far from being rare, side effects, very grotesque, painful, problematic, damaging side effects are very, very common. And I don't even want to get into it. We're going to go too far afield. But what I'm trying to say to you all is that, and I think a lot of you know this, is that it's real easy to say, oh, someone is anti trans, he's a bigot. But if we actually get into what I understand Charlie Kirk had a really abrasive manner, and I understand that he was a showman, and at times he would make fun of people and stuff and whatever. But if you look into his beliefs about this stuff, what you'll see is that he had a lot of legitimate points. You might not end up agreeing with him. You might contest those points, but this was an intelligent guy who he went around the country for a living arguing with college students about these subjects. So it's just not fair to say because he had issues with these various things or he critiqued these various things that he was a bigot. We are just not, when it comes to these various issues, we have not gotten to the point as a society where we have all coalesced around a particular idea. In the way that society eventually coalesced around the idea that slavery was wrong and we shouldn't do it, we're not there yet with this other stuff. And that's because these things are much more complicated. And, it's the same thing. I'll give you one more example before we move on. It's the same thing with critiques of Islamic ideology. And I use the term ideology because I'm not actually talking about the actual religion, which a number of my friends practice. I'm talking about, though, in the generally what we call the Islamic world, there are some ideologies that you see that have emerged and cultural practices and ideas, and not all of them transfer well to the Western world. And so I'll give you an example. There has been over the past 10, 15 years a dramatic increase in sexual assaults and rapes in various European countries that have taken in a lot of migrants. And what you see when you look into the statistics is that by far it is migrants from Muslim countries. Now, I'm not blaming Islam per se, but what I'm saying is that you tend to have certain cultural attitudes. No, not everyone. In some places too, it's worse than others, but you tend to have certain cultural attitudes in the Islamic world, and particularly among Islamic fundamentalists that don't transfer well to the Western world. So to say, for instance, that Charlie Kirk, oh, he was anti-Muslim, he's a bigot. Charlie Kirk was not, as far as I understand, he was not actually anti-Islam or anti-Muslims, but he had concerns about the encroachment of Islamic culture and migrants from Islamic countries into European and American culture and society. Again, you can disagree with that, fine, but I'm trying to say that it's a lot more complicated than just to say someone is a bigot. It just is. So I think that's one thing that I think is interesting. Now, I've seen some people saying that because he was such a proponent of the Second Amendment, and he's even on record as saying that we have to accept a certain number of deaths, a certain number of school shootings, what have you, because in order to protect the Second Amendment. And I've seen a number of people saying, well, look, he deserved what was coming to him basically because he's the one who's been saying that this is a risk that we have to accept, right? And I just don't think that analogy works. I saw someone make a good point on Instagram responding to that, that it would be the equivalent of telling someone who is pro-abortion that you're happy that they miscarried because they had it coming to them, right? Like because of their views. Like that's just it just is not the same. And yes, of course, I'm sure that if Charlie Kirk were alive right now and we were to say to him, "Do you know that tomorrow you're going to go to this if you're going to go to this rally and you're going to be shot?" Do you think that he would choose that in order to stand up for the Second Amendment? Of course not. He's going to say, screw, going to this event and standing up for the Second Amendment. I don't want to get shot. I don't want to I want to live. I don't want my daughter and my wife to have to exist without me. Of course, all of us are like that. But it's really silly and to say that because he was a proponent of the Second Amendment that he deserved what was coming to him or he got what was coming to him. Like I know I live here in Texas. I grew up in East Texas. Most people that I know have guns. We have guns legally. We have guns. It's hard to explain to people who do not have an appreciation for the Second Amendment or think that it's just a bunch of silliness, and also who have not grown up in areas with gun culture. It's hard to explain to them why the Second Amendment is important to people like us, to people like me. And I know that there are a number of people who say, "Do you really think that if the government became tyrannical, that you could fight off a government that has tanks and bombs? You could fight them off with your pistol or whatever you've got. Do you really think that?" Well, I'm going to tell y'all something. If you look at the most successful insurgencies of the last, say, 100 years, talking Vietnam, we're talking Afghanistan with the Russians or Afghanistan with even the Americans and so forth. What you see is that very often in history, you have a superpower with tons of high tech, top of the line weapons and billions of dollars of weapons that still cannot seem to effectively conquer or fight off a pitifully armed population. So if you look at what the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, were able to do against the French and against the Americans, I'm not saying that it was just a bunch of farmers and villagers with their little guns or whatever, but it was a lot of that. And so, if you have an armed population, if you have an armed citizenry, then there is a good argument to be made. And this is what the founding fathers had in mind with the Second Amendment. There's a good argument to be made that that can ensure a freedom from a tyrannical government. The other thing I'll say is that there are just a lot of people who have successfully defended their lives. We're talking home invasions or attacks in public because they were carrying, because they had a firearm. And I think that firearms are feminist. I know that this sounds funny to some people, but I think that a woman is physically weaker than a man almost in all situations. We know this. And so a gun, and it's not like she can do a whole lot with a knife either. Again, even with a knife, it still comes down to brute strength often. A gun, it doesn't work in all situations. It wouldn't have helped the lady on the train, right? She wouldn't have seen the guy in time. But a gun is a great equalizer. It's a great equalizer between the genders. So I don't want to get into a whole rabbit hole with the gun thing, but I just, again, I see that. I see people bringing that up with Charlie Kirk, right? All right. Now, I will say this though, and this is where now I'm going to start pissing off people on the other side who've been cheering me on. Yeah, you tell those leftists. And I just want to preface this by saying, in no way, in any way, did Charlie Kirk in any way ask for or deserve what happened to him. But I have seen people online bemoaning this to an extent and getting upset about it to such an extent that they're saying things like, "We have turned a dark new page in our history. We have entered the killing of Charlie Kirk. We have entered a dark, dark era, and a dark new era in our history." In other words, there are people online who see this as some kind of really transformational, radicalizing event. And I just want to say, if we're looking at history, y'all, political shootings are not uncommon. They're not uncommon. Has anybody ever seen the movie The People versus Larry Flint? I mean, there was a guy who was actually on the left, and depending on how you look at him, he was either putting out smutty magazines or he was also a hero for the for the First Amendment, right? But he was shot. He was a controversial figure, and he was shot by some crazy dude who didn't like what he was doing, and he ended up. Larry Flint was paralyzed. He was paralyzed for the rest of his life. In the '60s, you had political figures getting gunned down right and left. I mean, obviously, we know about the Kennedys, but and MLK, but there were a bunch of others. There were tons of assassinations in the '60s, and I mean, just Reagan was shot, 1980, right? Or 81, whenever that happened, and so forth. I'm not saying that this is something that we should just accept, like, oh, this doesn't bother me, or oh, yeah, this is just how it is. If you're a political figure or you're out there doing controversial stuff, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that it's really easy, y'all, to get when you see what's happening in the news, and especially because we're just always glued to our phones now, me too, seeing it, I mean, me as well, seeing all of this stuff constantly and social media and everything, it's really easy to get a panicked feeling and to get a feeling like you are on the precipice of some new era in human history that's going to be worse than the past, that things have never been as crazy as they are now. And I'm just telling you, every generation feels that way, and that's why there's so much historically, so much, like, apocalypticism, for each generation. It was gonna be Y2K. Remember, those of you who are alive or whatever, "Oh, Y2K, all of our computers are gonna everything mechanical is gonna, like, shut down and turn against us, and we're gonna turn into some kind of, like, Mad Max situation." That didn't happen. Like, 9/11, as horrible as 9/11 was, and I'm gonna talk about that a little more, later, but, we might end up going actually an hour the way I'm rambling. I'm gonna have to, take a break in a minute, though, to do that thing. But 9/11, everybody, and as horrible as that was, and yeah, it had a lot of, effects, ramifications, but people felt like, "Oh, this is the end of the world." It's always this feeling of like, "This is the end of the world. Now it's starting. Now it's starting." And I know with technology, we got a lot of new ways for people to destroy themselves and hurt themselves and cause suffering. But, like, I just want people to understand this political shootings like this, shootings of public figures, controversial public figures, it does happen. It has happened. It will continue to happen. Again, I'm not saying it's okay or acceptable, but it's not some new dawn of some new era here. It just isn't. And while Charlie Kirk did not in any way deserve what happened to him, full stop. When and I put myself in this category, a lot of us, when you're out there, he was out there antagonizing people. He was a nice guy personally, but he had a very abrasive style, and he would make fun of people when he was doing these tours. And I mean, I have no problem with any of that. I do the same thing. But I mean, when you're out there constantly pushing buttons, and I'm not saying that you deserve what happens or that you even should expect it, but, like, I'm just saying that these things do happen. There have been in the past many different kinds of political and celebrity shootings. I mean, John Lennon, that was something huge. You had this huge foundational musical figure, this rock star. He was shot, right? These things do happen. It's not like something new. It's kind of like in Ecclesiastes. The writer of Ecclesiastes says there is nothing new under the sun. And in a lot of ways, not always, but in a lot of ways, that's really the case. Iryna Zarutska, I'll just say this. I don't know about you all, but on my feed, Twitter, I've seen over the past several days a number of people and a number of big accounts using terms like black fatigue. Let me tell you basically what I think they're talking about when they talk about some of these accounts, when they talk about black fatigue, or basically a frustration that they say that lots of white people feel. There does seem to be, when you look at crime statistics, there does, and look, I know it's complicated when we talk about statistics and stuff, but there's a ton of research into crime. And when you look at crime statistics, it is true that certain minorities, like black people, are highly overrepresented when it comes to crime statistics, and when it comes to, let's say, and look, I can already hear people saying, okay, but a lot of that's for drug stuff. And also, police are probably heavily patrolling black neighborhoods more, and so they're catching that crime more than people who are, smoking weed in their house in a white neighborhood or whatever. I know I've taken all those classes and stuff and read those books and had these discussions. To an extent, what you'd be saying there is correct, but I'm talking about, let's just take everything off the table but murder. When you look at the murder rates, like in New York City, something like 98% of murders that are committed by, in this case, blacks or Latinos. That's just a number that, like, that's a number that is of some significance. I'll just put it like that. And it doesn't mean, and here's where we get to the generalization problem again, right? It doesn't mean that anyone with a brain thinks that the majority of black people, or my black friends or people I encounter or work with, that they have more criminality than me or anyone else. Like, that's obviously not what that means. This is the question I think that we kind of want to turn to then. This is really a question about how to deal with crime in our society and how to deal with mental illness. We can understand why there's a frustration, why some people are taking a racial angle in their critiques. I've just explained it to you. But really what I think is the big issue with the kind of violence that we see on the train, or what we see happening in our cities increasingly, is an issue of what is wrong with the way that we're treating crime and or mental illness in society. And one thing I think that a lot of us know is that it used to be, decades ago, you had a lot more mental asylums, like state mental hospitals. They used to be called you had a lot of sanatoriums too. That was a term that was used a lot in the 20th century, earlier 20th century. Sanatoriums, like, it was understood that there were a number of people in society that were just crazy and were going to continue to be crazy, mentally ill, whatever. I don't care. We all struggle with mental health issues to some degree, right? But there were some people that were just so batshit crazy that they were just going to have to be locked up pretty much for the rest of their life. And this used to be something that was much more accepted in society, and there was much more government funding for mental health. And look, I can tell you, I'm in a decent sized town, city in central Texas, and I live in I affectionately call it the ghetto, because it is a poorer neighborhood and it's gentrifying or whatever. But like, I'm constantly walking around the ghetto, and constantly walking around the middle of the night sometimes. And by the way, nothing has ever happened to me, but I'll get to that in a moment. But like, yeah, I see a ton of homeless people, and I see it, and I'd say almost all of them, they're clear mental issues. There's a guy that I see constantly, and no matter how hot it is outside, even if it's 100 degrees, he wears the same coat. It's like a ski coat or something. It's got all of this, like an Arctic coat, right? Like North Face, I'm going to Mount Everest. And he wears it, and usually he's bundled up. He has it, like, the hood totally around him. He's got it, like, pulled and zipped and everything. He walks around in 100-degree Texas heat, I guess for hours, walks around like that. And he carries coat hangers. Usually we'll have 3 coat hangers in his hand, and he has really long nails that he doesn't trim. And he walks around like that, and I see him regularly, and he doesn't speak. He'll just hold out his hand because he wants some money, if you have any change, right? And so he'll just silently hold out his hand, and if I have some money or some change, I'll give it to him, and then he'll take it back and he'll turn away from me and he'll just start walking. There's just lots of crazy people around, and most of the time they're not violent. They're like this dude that I'm describing to you. But you do have situations like this guy who apparently who killed this woman, who apparently had a long history of mentally disturbed behavior, and he had called 911 a while back, begging the police to come and help him because somebody had implanted something in his brain or something, these clear signs of schizophrenia. Now, I know that some people are saying, well, he's not insane, he's not crazy. Look at what he said right after he killed her. He said, I got that white girl. He's recorded, right, saying this. I got that white girl. And then he says, she called me a N-word, right? She called me a nigger. And people say that means he wasn't crazy. Clearly, this crazy thing is just an act. In fact, it was just a hate crime, and he attacked her because she was white. Well, the thing about mental illness and about schizophrenia that's so tricky is that both can be true at the same time. And I think that's what's likely is schizophrenia doesn't mean that someone is just totally whacked out all the time. I've worked over the years in certain service jobs with schizophrenics, and I've seen what happens to them when they get off their medication and stuff. It doesn't mean you're just like whacked out in another zone all the time. You know, these people can work, they can have relationships, even like they can seem like they're functional, but meanwhile, they have mad paranoia going on in their brain, and they have voices at times actually audible, at other times not, voices that are constantly trying to tell them crazy shit and to do crazy shit. Again, not usually violent, but and so it's very possible that the guy was, yes, racist, and yes, attacked her because she was a white girl, but also because he was crazy and had extreme paranoia, schizophrenia induced, and was hearing voices or whatever. Like, completely makes sense. But that's not the easy answer that people want. People want to believe that if we just make prisons worse, and we just execute more people, and we just string more people, and we torture people, even. I've seen a number of commentators, Matt Walsh, I think, was one of them, saying that we need to basically bring back torture. We need to bring back medieval torture. I've even some friends of mine, and I'm totally fine with them sharing that. I mean, who knows? They could be right, saying we need to bring back hardcore execution methods. We need to maybe even torture, and we need to start executing a lot more people, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that that would have worked in this case. I don't think that would have deterred this guy. And I don't know, y'all. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm crazy, but I don't think that most people, when they commit crimes, they actually really think about the punishment. I think most people think they can get away with it or something, or they wouldn't do it because most criminals get caught, right? So all I'm saying here, I'm not saying that that this guy, it's not terrible that he was let go by a judge after being arrested or what 15 times. I'm not saying that we should put him in some cozy mental hospital just because he says he's crazy or what. I'm just saying that real life often is just not as simple as the social media discourse, and that's no shock. We all know that, right? And the people who say this stuff online, they know it too. But we all gotta say our stuff and get our get our I'm sorry. We got to say our stuff and we got to get our lines out there. But to me, it's frustrating, but I honestly don't know. I I, I don't think there's an easy answer here. What would have been nice is if this guy, when he was apprehended one of those other 15 times when he apparently was in trouble with the law, if he had been diagnosed and if they had said, okay, I'm sorry, sir, you're going to have to go to the mental hospital and you're going to have to stay there. But as a lot of you know, it's almost impossible to get someone held at a place for longer than a day or two or three because they've changed so much. So look, I don't want to ramble on about all the stuff that we kind of know anyway. The mental health thing, I do think it's a huge thing. Andrea Burkhart wrote about this in her Substack. It's a huge thing, and I don't know if there are easy answers there. And sure, let's get tougher on crime and let's see what happens. Like cashless bail and stuff like that. People say that that's ridiculous, and oh, okay, fine. It's just here's the deal. And I was trying to explain this the other day to again a friend of mine who was saying we just need to get tougher and worse punishments and more executions and et cetera, fewer appeals and all that. Here's the thing though. The law, you have to imagine when you're talking about reforms and making the law, the criminal justice system tougher, you have to remember that there are going to be a number of innocent people and falsely accused people who get caught up in this net. That's just the nature of the game. Think of how many guys who were on death row have been exonerated once DNA testing came into being. A lot. And those guys would have been executed. And there are people who have been executed that we find out later were innocent. Now, I'm not saying that means I actually do think that means we shouldn't have the death penalty, but I know a number of people don't buy that. But you do have to imagine and think about whether you want draconian changes in the law to be widely applied, because it's easy to get angry at one, in this case, one animal, as people are saying, who did this horrible thing to this beautiful, angelic, sweet girl. But you have to imagine a lot of other situations and think about, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying that's determinative, but that's something to consider, right? I've heard a couple of people in the last several days tell me that our jails, our prisons, I'm sorry, our prisons are too comfortable and we need to make them worse. And it's interesting to me that there is this, I think it's a huge misconception that prisons, at least maximum security prisons where violent offenders go. I'm not talking about federal prisons. I'm not talking about minimum or mid security, like where Elizabeth Holmes is, right? I'm not talking about that. Maybe those are cushy. But if you're a violent offender and you go to a maximum security prison, it's still, those things are still hellholes. I know. I've talked to people who have been in prison, even recently. Those things are hellholes. And people say, "Oh, well, they get TV." Dude, just because you have a tiny fucking TV and you, it does not mean that you are not still in hell. Or maybe you've got a big TV. I don't know. Or even if you have a fucking iPad, it doesn't mean that you're not still in a hellish environment. First of all, people in prison, look at who they're in there with. When you this is something I talked to, this was a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, a woman, she had to go to prison, like normal, high security women's prison. She wasn't violent, but anyways, long story, but and she wasn't wrongly accused, but I don't think she should have been there. But anyway, here's the point. She said that one of the worst things about prison is that you are stuck in there with a ton of people who have personality disorders or even are flat out insane, right? People who have personality disorders, because by its very nature, the people who end up in prison are going to be the ones with the worst mental health issues, disposition issues, personality disorders, psychopathy, whatever. And so you find yourself caged up for a period of time, living with having to piss and shit in front of, even, right? These, all of these crazy or problematic or violent people. That in and of itself creates, it makes it hellish. It creates a huge problematic dynamic. And the depressing nature, even aesthetically, of prison. Just, I mean, just how, I don't know. I don't know. Some people, I feel like they need to actually watch a prison documentary or a prison drama and remind themselves of how much prison sucks. Escape at Dannemora is a great series, by the way. If you want to get a feel for what prison is like, I felt like I was locked in there with those guys in that movie, and it's a true story. You should check it out. Escape at Dannemora. It's one of my favorite drama series. Benicio del Toro and Paul Dano, they're amazing, but Patricia Arquette is the real is the real show there. But anyway, so I think prison is a hellhole. I don't care if they can look at TV or whatever. It's still a hellhole. There's still a ton of danger and menace, and it's even having to piss and shit in front of people every day. I mean, you're living in a bathroom. You're living in a bathroom when you're in prison. I see a lot of accounts talking about how the situation with crime in our country has become untenable, but I see that there are a lot of conflicting statistics and conflicting research on where we're at with crime, that in a number of places, crime has been going down. I know that urban areas, I see it even in Dallas. I know that urban areas have gone downhill in a lot of ways. And I wouldn't deny that, like, you look at California and what's happened to a number of those cities and stuff. So maybe it's on a case by case or locational basis where we see a lot of deterioration in terms of crime in certain places and then not so much in others. But it seems like this idea of, like, this just massive crime wave, we're about to be overridden with crime. I mean, this is something that's been going on forever. Even I remember in the 80s, it was like, oh, crack cocaine, it's the crime, and all the crime from that. And these things tend to get over sensationalized. Shocking, right? But they tend to get over sensationalized. And I think that it's always good to be self-aware. It's always good to have situational awareness, right? And we as women, and not just women, right? Men too, but like, when I go outside and I walk around at night or in day, even bad neighborhood or whatever, like, I take my mace with me and I'm aware and whatever. But I will say this. Your chances, all of you, and I know you know this, but your chances, all of you, of being involved in a violent crime like this are so, so, so small. It's kind of like the same, it's kind of like a similar dynamic as thinking about dying in an airplane crash. I know that doesn't make it any easier because it's no easier for me to get on an airplane. Every time I get on an airplane, I am like fucking terrified. But statistically, it's a very safe place for me to be. And like I said, I've walked around, knock on wood, I've walked around the ghetto around here, even in the middle of the night, and nothing's ever happened to me. Now, maybe that's famous last words. I hope not. But I think that it's always good not to get swept up in panic. You can look at your social media and you can feel like if we look at social media, it gives the impression that every time we step out of our doors, we're basically in a war zone. There's just all of this crime that's just waiting to happen. You can't even get on a train. You can't even ride a train, ladies. You're going to get stabbed in the neck. And it's not true. And as horrible as what happened to that woman was, and I'm not saying that there aren't changes that need to be made in the justice system, perhaps the fact that the guy again had been picked up like 12, 15 times, something like that, right? But there is such a thing in life, and I guess this is where I'll close there before looking at your comments. This is where the philosophy professor in me is going to come out, right? There is just bad luck in life. I'm not trivializing what happened to her, but there is just bad luck in life. And it's easy because of social media to get the sense that you're just always like one step away from something horrible happening to you. And so I think that's the thing, again, that really I think is problematic about some of this discourse is they're talking about they're getting radicalized, and this is like things are the worst that they've ever been, and blah blah blah. And to an extent, y'all, and human beings aren't good at this. We also, to a degree, we have to just realize that the very nature of life is existentially precarious. This world, I mean, nature itself, red in tooth and claw, nature, its whole ecosystem exists on predation. Not all animals are carnivores, but you've got a hell of a lot of animals on the food chain that are carnivores. And so the entire functioning of nature is based on violence. And I'm saying something simple, but I'm also trying to say something profound here to think about. Life itself is based on violence. Most of us tomorrow are going to get up and as we go through our day, we're going to eat the meat of butchered animals. And I'm not even judging it. I do think that we could do a better job with the way that we house these animals and we take care of them before we kill them for food. But I mean, think of the fact that our existence, most of us who are meat eaters, it is founded on the most brutal act you can think of. And I mean, people will say, "What are you talking about? Are you now saying that that what happened on that train was okay because we're all butchers eating animals?" I'm not saying that. I'm saying, though, that one of the reasons why something like this event jars us so much is because it is one of those times in life when we make contact, even briefly, we make contact with what Jacques Lacan called the real. And the real does not refer to the idea of real versus fantasy, like something exists or it doesn't, but the real refers to the moments in life when the safe structures of civilization that we have set up and that we take comfort in, when something breaks through, violence or catastrophe, a tornado, or that guy on the train that you weren't even paying attention to, or that guy in the audience, you're giving a speech, that crazy guy in the audience who shows up at your rally. That is the real, and it is something that it lies behind everything in life. It is always there. It is a reality. It is a foundational reality of this world and of nature and of existence. And yet it is behind a curtain, almost like in The Wizard of Oz, where you have the man behind the curtain. It is that which stays in the shadows because we can't always have it in front of us. If we always had it in front of us, we'd go crazy, which is why people are going crazy in a lot of ways from being exposed to all this so much on social media, right? Certain things, we have to have them hidden behind the curtain, behind the structure. And yet, no matter how much civilization builds up these structures And no matter how much civilization attempts to keep us safe and everything regulated, at the same time, there are always going to be these elements of the real that break through. And here's the interesting thing about the real from a psychoanalytic perspective: there is no way to fully integrate the real into your psyche. It's like you're never going to be okay with certain things. Certain things are just never going to make sense. You're never not going to be made crazy by them. All you can do is try to acknowledge them and then shift your sight from them, right? Or as Lacan would say, I think that therapy is part of. He was a therapist, right? Therapy is a way of also dealing with the real, that we kind of a catharsis in a way. But it is. I'll tell you this to get to my last point here. 9/11. I wanted to talk just briefly or say something about 9/11. 9/11 was one of those times when the real broke through, and it was Osama bin Laden really chose well his targets because and his methods there, because he knew that image of those planes going into those huge New York towers, that was going to be an image that would be so captivating that people would see it again and again and again. And even though we did not have social media when 9/11 happened. We had some people had cell phones, but very primitive, and they were not iPhones. You weren't watching movies on your phones. There was enough footage of that from that, and it was shown on a loop. I mean, it was just over for days, no matter what channel you were looking at, no matter what channel on TV, over and over and over. And people had similar feelings. People were saying, this is sort of an end of the world. This is a whole new world now. Nothing will ever be the same. We've turned a whole new dark corner, et cetera. It's a new page in our history, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'm not saying it wasn't significant or monumental, but it's interesting that people with every generation, there are these catastrophes. There are these moments when the real intrudes into our lives, into our civilized lives, and it is a captivating moment, a terrifying, horrific moment. But it's a captivating moment for people, and I think that it's been interesting to see how these two events, Charlie Kirk and Iryna Zarutska, these two events have really ignited this kind of a feeling, this kind of a response. So anyway, it is late. It is 3:44 a.m. here. My goodness. Let me see. I'm going to skim through some of your comments. I still can't believe Charlie Kirk is gone. Yep. Yep. Um, I don't know Charlie Kirk to speak on the matter, but in general, if you utter a word of controversy, you'll ruffle some feathers. Yeah, and it takes an intelligent or adult person to see that there's a difference between what you're saying and saying that, well, he deserved it because what he was doing. It's like it's a bridge that anybody in the public eye has to cross in their mind, right? And 40 Man says, so now this morning I just fed the squirrels who are definitely getting fatter. So there's some progress there. That's the thing, y'all, is like to I'm gonna have to get off. It's too late. But I just want to say one more thing there to your point about feeding the squirrels. I think that a lot of us, all of us, have this feeling when things like this happen, these kinds of, as I said, intrusions of the real, these moments of horror, these existentially jarring moments. I think that we have this feeling of like, well, what do we do now? Or how do we get over this, or how do we deal with this? I just watched a movie about Jackie Kennedy with Natalie Portman. It's called Jackie. Some of you might have seen it. And honestly, it was very slow, and it was kind of tiresome at times. That's just what that director does. He makes these biographies. He did one of Maria Callas that Angelina Jolie was in. He did the Kristen Stewart Princess Diana movie, and like his movies are all very well done aesthetically. They have a lot of obvious depth and care taken with them, and great performances, but they all are kind of like slow and a little like tiresome, dull. I don't know. But anyway, this Natalie Portman was playing Jackie, and the movie takes place mostly after her husband has been assassinated. And so, anyway, toward the end of the movie, she's taking a walk with her priest, And she says to him, I'm so depressed. I don't even for the children, I don't even want to go on anymore. This just seems what's happened, not only losing her husband, but the whole trauma of all of it and the horror of the real, right? And her life being in an instant basically taken from her, the life that as she knew it. And she says this, what's happened to Jack, what happened to him is so horrific that God just seems to me to be utterly cruel, and all of this just seems to be entirely pointless, and I can't find a reason to keep going.
Why are you really here?
Because I needed to talk.
You say that you pray every night to die, that your children have no use for you. You wish only to be with your husband. And yet, I'm not burying you today. There comes a time in man's search for meaning when one realizes that there are no answers. And when you come to that horrible, unavoidable realization, you accept it or you kill yourself. Or you simply stop searching. I have lived a blessed life. And yet every night when I climb into bed, turn off the lights and stare into the dark, I wonder, is this all there is?
You wonder?
Every soul on this planet does. But then when morning comes, we all wake up and make a pot of coffee.
Why do we bother?
Because we do. You did this morning. You will again tomorrow. But God, in his infinite wisdom, has made sure it is just enough for us.
That doesn't answer anything at all, but it doesn't answer anything at all. But I find something about that actually deeply, deeply meaningful. And I think in the end, we somehow have to make peace with not having the answers and yet find a way to continue with every day. And sometimes it's that cup of coffee in the morning that that gets you onto the next thing. Anyway, all right, everybody, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope that I don't know. I was going to say I hope that everybody starts feeling better, but then again, something about that seems almost like a lie or hypocrisy, right? Should we even feel better? But I hope that everybody enjoys their cup of coffee tomorrow.